for myself, you guys know, in my book, I talk about Andre. I talk about, going to Europe for the first time, going to Paris, and being at, like, I believe it was a Vivian Westwood show, and Andre sees me and motions for me to come to him, and I go over to him, and he, asked me who I was and why I was there, and I told him, and he took me in, and he said, "Where are you seated?" And I told him I was in the back. He said, "Oh, sit behind me." So my first show in Paris, I got to sit second row, which you guys may be like, well, it wasn't front row, but you don't understand. Second row is a really big deal, and that was because of Andre Leon Talley. And over the years, we always had, no, I should not say we, I should say I had a relationship with Andre where I would see him and he would, I would be, of course, a little hesitant to go up to him because he is Andre, and he would always be so warm and inviting to me, and he was always so loving towards me. Until finally I really got the memo. I was like, oh, I don't have to be afraid of him. He really likes me. He really fucks with me. Like, he thinks I'm a good thing. And then once I realized that, honey, it was off to the fucking races. You couldn't tell me nothing then. You know what I mean? He was a big supporter of fashion queens, and would often tell me how proud he was of me for being on TV and being able to have these kind of conversations about fashion. He loved me on the Wendy Williams show on the Style Squad. And right before, um, right after my book launched in the middle of a pandemic, I actually called him up and asked him if he would he actually do a book launch event with me. And he said, send me the book. I sent it to him. He said he loved it, and he said he would. And I'll never forget, we had planned on doing it, I think maybe in March or something. And around that time, I'm talking about March of 2020. And around that time, no, 2021, right? Yeah, March 2021. Around that time is when the news started coming out that he was maybe going to be evicted from his home in White Plains, and that, all this stuff was going on. And so I called him just to check on him. And he's like, I'm fine, but when are we doing our thing with the book? I said, oh, Andre, I don't want to worry you about that. I mean, that's fine. Like, whatever about that. He's like, no, I want to do it. I want to do it. I love your book. I want to support you. Like, that's the kind of person he was for me. He was always very supportive. And so today we are going to play a lot of gospel music because he loved, loved, loved the Lord. He was a big, big, big church goer. He went to church in Harlem at Abyssinian. As a matter of fact, the Reverend Calvin Butts eulogized him, not eulogized him, but wrote a piece about him in the New York Times today. But he was always at Abyssinian before the pandemic. And this is what Reverend Calvin Butts had to say. He said, with all his celebrity and globetrotting, he came in the best of times and he showed up in the worst of times. He showed up to worship. He supported the church. He gave generously, and his friends loved him. And that, I can tell you, is so very true. Like, the folks that I know that know Andre from church say that he was always there, and he was just always so happy in church. And that has a lot to do with the way he was raised. He was from North Carolina. He was raised by his grandmother, who was a washerwoman. And so, they didn't grow up rich, but his grandmother, he talks about his grandmother in his book, Chiffon Trenches, about how regal she was and about how elegant she was and how everything had its place. And so he was very discerning. He learned to be very discerning at his grandmother's knee. And he had greater ideas about his life than just being in North Carolina. And so he went to a historically black college, the University of North Carolina. Wait, I don't want to get the name of his school wrong. What? Do we have the name of his school, Andrea? I don't think we do.
North Carolina Central University.
Thank you. Which is a HBCU, a historically black college and university. And when he graduated from there, he made his way up north and he went to Brown University, which of course is an Ivy League school. And once he got there, that's when his new life really took off. All of this is in this book, but when you read the book, you see that he really never lost his touch. For as grand as he was, for the SAT words that he used. I don't even, Andrea, would you even call them SAT words? What's higher than the SAT words? Like, his vocabulary was like unparalleled. It was like no other. People don't even speak like that anymore, which is a shame. When you spoke to Andre, you always had this desire to kind of ante up. You were like always like, oh, I need to make sure that I'm communicating in the best way possible, in the most eloquent way possible, because that's what he made you feel like. And we all need people that push us. We all need people that we can look at and say, I would like to take a page out of that book and be better at something. And Andre was that for so many of us, especially younger black people in fashion. Virgil Abloh, was the first black designer for Louis Vuitton. And that was a huge deal. But it doesn't happen without Andre Leon Talley, because he was the only one. He was the only one. And as a matter of fact, in New Yorker magazine, they did a profile on him, and they called him the only one. The article was called that. And it's because he was a black editor at the top of fashion publishing. And as we all know, as I've talked about it, time and time again, high-end fashion is notoriously white and very elitist. And here he was, 6'6", and, grand as all can be, cutting a striking figure, whether or not he was wearing those beautiful bespoke tailored suits when he was a thin young dandy, or whether he was wearing these grandiose capes that everyone from Tom Ford to Dapper Dan made for him. He just had this grand air about him. But yet, if you call them in Harlem, at the church, at Boulevard Bistro, or at Melba's, or, if you sat with them at Dapper Dan's Atelier, you understood that this was a man from South Carolina who loved his grandmother's biscuits, and who loved the Lord. And that's the way I want to remember him. Yes, as this fashion titan, but also as this incredibly lovely human. And there are lots of people who have a lot of different things to say about him. And, I think everyone needs to be reminded that when you close your eyes, a lot of people won't have a lot of different things to say about you. That's why in my book I talk about how you being perceived, right? Because, I think we all like to think that when we die, everyone's just going to have the best things to say. There are very few people that are going to get away with dying and everyone having lovely platitudes to say about them. Wouldn't you agree, Andrea?
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Very few people. I think it's let's think about some of the most well-loved people, beloved people. Like a Tom Hanks, everyone loves him. Who knows? Might come out, he was a stingy boss. I don't know. I'm not going to say that. Let's not put down Tom Hanks. But, there's just a few people in the world that you can really think of, and you're like, I bet that person's just nice. And, never got on anyone's bad side. Very few people in the world. Nobody on this call is fitting that bill, by the way. Not one of y'all. And certainly not me. And so I always look at someone like Andre with a really kind of more sensitive eye and an eye of compassion.